Hi, everyone. So if you haven't already watched part one of this presentation, please go check it out. My name is Matthew Cocking. I'm the Natural Resources Conservation Service Forester for the North Coast of California. Part one was about conservation planning and prescribed fire with NRCS, the Natural Resources Conservation Service in California. This part is about NRCS policy in relation to prescribed fire. If you aren't familiar or if you haven't watched part one, NRCS is the Natural Resources Conservation Service. We are a federal agency in the U.S. Department of Agriculture. This is a repeat slide from part one. We assist private farmers, ranchers, and forest landowners to help conserve natural resources on their lands. We do this through technical assistance and financial assistance programs where we provide technical information to landowners and then funding to help them implement projects. One of those practices that we can fund and plan is prescribed burning. It's practice code 338. We can also fund written burn plans, which is practice code 112. Other facilitating practices also can receive funding and be planned with NRCS. Some of those are listed here. We have specific policy for 112 and 338 that I'm going to talk about. Those policies can be a bit more rigorous than other planning that we do. First, I want to talk about the training and qualifications requirements in our policy for prescribed fire. I broke this down into three categories. The first category is mostly in relation to our own internal staff. And so this is just disclosure of information for those of you who work with our staff in other parts of the state. To be able to recommend or include prescribed fire to a client in their conservation plan as a line item in a potential contract, NRCS staff have to complete a minimum of 16 hours of basic awareness training. So this would be something that akin to what firefighters might call basic fire school for the National Wildfire Coordinating Group, just 16 hours of it, classroom-based, online-based. That is something that then would be refreshed every 5 years with 4 hours of work. This is just to recommend and speak with a client specifically about prescribed fire and be able to put it in a conservation plan as a practice. When we get to the more technical aspect of burn planning, writing a burn plan with specific burn objectives, specific fire behavior prescription, and fuels and weather prescriptions, that requires a lot more training. This can be done by NRCS staff if they do the training needed for it and obtain the qualifications, or it might be done by a technical service provider, a TSP, which is someone certified by NRCS to plan and implement and sign off on NRCS standard practices through a certification they get from NRCS. We have technical service providers for many different types of practices. For prescribed fire, we have very few, but it's something we're looking for more of. To be able to plan prescribed burns to this level, write burn plans, and do the technical specification and design for a prescribed fire, in this category 2, what I call in here category 2, you would have to participate in a training-specific prescribed burn. So there have to be a prescribed burn that is part of a training live fire event. You'd also have to document or show that you've participated in 3 additional prescribed burns in some operational way. And then you'd have to author 3 burn plans that meet NRCS policy for burn plans, which I'll go over in a little bit. And those are subject to review. They have to be approved by somebody who has the authority to approve them. Category 3 is under our policy, people who are authorized or allowed to implement prescribed fire for an NRCS contract. So this would be typically a private contractor. NRCS staff are not going to act as burn bosses, definitely not in the short term. So in the private sector, who do we have? The national policy for prescribed fire from NRCS states that a burn boss, somebody that the client hires to lead their prescribed burn, is any individual chosen by the landowner. NRCS state offices have the option of adding addendums to specific policies like our prescribed fire policy. And the state of California, NRCS, has typically added policy about prescribed burning for the state of California. Right now, our state office, our leadership is still in a new draft of that because we just received last year the new national standard or the revised national standard. So our state office leadership is currently working on the California addendum to the national policy. And that addendum adds some rigorous qualification standards for individuals that can be hired by our clients to implement contracted NRCS prescribed burns. That bar that has to be met involves some kind of official training. It could come from CAL FIRE, that's kind of a vague place to look. It could be National Wildfire Coordinating Group Prescribed Burn Boss 2 level certification. This is a difficult place to find people in the private sector that have that type of qualification because it's reserved, that training is typically reserved for federal employees, not NRCS employees, but some of the firefighting agencies like the U.S. Forest Service, the National Park Service, BLM, BIA. So that can be a hard bar to meet, either of those. We are hoping that we'll be able to use the upcoming California Prescribed Burn Boss state certification, but that's tentative. Our state leadership has not made a determination on whether they will include that as acceptable qualification level for contractable burn bosses for NRCS contracted prescribed burns. So as of April 2020, the disclaimer at the bottom of the slide there, NRCS California State Amendment to policy is in draft status. Information above is reflective of the national policy, but also includes the posture that our state is currently taking, as I understand it. With our own staff for Category 1 recommending or including prescribed fire in a contract, we only have currently a couple people that even have the authority to do that right now. We're trying to get to 10, and as I said in part 1, we've specified some individuals in our staff that we'd like to get the qualifications or the training that they need, that 16 hours, to be able to interact with clients about prescribed fire more. In categories 2 and 3, this level of qualification or certification for prescribed fire, NRCS doesn't have any staff that's to that level. In the private sector, we have one technical service provider registered with us that went through that certification program with NRCS in the state. There may be other people. I know there are others out there that have those level of qualifications and some that are active contractors, and there may be others that are retired or don't work. We're actively trying to find more, but I'm not sure how many of them are actually out there. And so that's an interesting question mark and certainly a bottleneck in the public framework. If you want to become a technical service provider, contact Steve Hill. He's in our Davis office, our state office in Davis. Technical service providers are individuals that are certified by NRCS to plan, design, and certify completion of specific NRCS standard practices. We're going to be heavily reliant, NRCS is going to be heavily reliant on this category, the private sector, to be able to deliver technical information to clients about prescribed fire and adequately and safely plan prescribed burning and implement prescribed burning. In the short term, all NRCS contracted burns have to follow a written burn plan. So this has to be written by someone that has that level of qualification. It's not going to be an NRCS staff member. We can fund a burn plan, Conservation Activity Plan 112, or they could be privately developed without NRCS funding through a contract between a landowner and a contractor. But we have specific requirements that I'll get to about burn plans. And if it meets those requirements, a burn plan does, then it can be used to contract prescribed burning, whether we've contracted for the prescribed burn plan or not. Implementation of prescribed burning must be led by a qualified burn boss, either a National Wildfire Coordinating Group Prescribed Burn Boss 2 or a former CAL FIRE employee with training or qualifications, which is, again, I said a vague category because I'm not exactly sure what that structure is for CAL FIRE. And then we're hoping, but it's tentative, that the California Certified Burn Boss program will be another way to meet this requirement. In the long term, NRCS is hoping that those 10 people we've identified in our staff that hopefully will be able to gain the 16-hour awareness training they need to be able to offer prescribed burning and contracts to clients, that in the long term we'll be able to get there, and that staff can assist more with the design and planning of prescribed fire, and hopefully at some point maybe even have staff that can write burn plans. We're not there right now. This is probably a number of years off, but it's hopeful. NRCS staff are, however, unlikely to ever lead NRCS contracted burns as burn boss. That would be, if it's a contracted prescribed burn, a type of double dip where NRCS is providing a payment to the landowner for items to conduct the burn that therein include hiring a burn boss. But then if NRCS were to offer staff to do that for them at free of cost, there would be a problem. So that's unlikely to happen, but in the long term, we're hoping that we have staff that can do more planning for prescribed fire, and perhaps at some point have some individuals that are even qualified to write specific burn plans. So quickly, this is what our NRCS national policy says is by definition in a burn plan at a minimum. So this is under the definition of a burn plan in our national policy. These 14 items at a minimum must be included in a burn plan for a burn plan to meet our requirement or what NRCS considers a burn plan. This is a national policy. So NRCS California is as much stuck with this as any of our clients or partners would be. Some of these items here, if you read through them, some of them might, for those of you who work a lot with prescribed fire, they might be a little vague or you might not understand what they mean. The policy does not offer a lot of additional explanation for what these items specifically mean. So, we're going to have to come up with interpretation at the state level. And states can be working through those issues as we do more contracting for prescribed burn plans and prescribed burns. So, the take home. NRCS is an option for funding prescribed fire, and it is an option for funding prescribed burn plans, written plans too. Delivery of prescribed burning assistance, however, can be hindered by qualifications requirements and our workforce shortages. So while we can fund it, we don't necessarily have the staff to be able to technically plan it. And so there's going to be a lot of need for private sector contractors that are out there and partners that have qualifications to work with us to be able to get the technical side dealt with so that we can provide funding assistance. We're hoping that the California Burn Boss Certification Program will offer some possible expansion to that and provide some more capacity in the state that's qualified. But again, that's tentative. In the short term, NRCS is not going to be able to offer a lot of the technical planning and design. And in the long term, we're hoping that we'll have more of that. So stick with us. Hopefully we'll all get there at some point. So that is part 2. I'm hoping that you will tune in for part 3. And if you haven't already, check out part 1.